G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you for this week's Creating News. Who is creating the news? Is it the big camera companies, software companies, or individuals? This week I bring you some of the most interesting stories that I have found from around the world. Let's start with the absolute tentpole this week, and that is Canon. Finally, after quite a few years of speculation as to what would happen with third-party lenses, we have lenses coming for the RF mount from multiple manufacturers. Also this week, we talk about the ongoing Sony firmware saga. Indeed, they have released firmware 2.0, yes, 2.0 already for the A9 III, along with 2.01 for the A1, which is to fix bugs. Yet I can see when I look on Sony Alpha Rumors, it seems to be continuing to cause problems for some Sony users. Also, Nikon has pushed out even more firmware updates. It looks like they're doing it for all cameras that they still support. All of that and more in this week's episode of Creating News. All right, let's talk about the Canon RF mount. Yes, we now have two third-party manufacturers now being allowed to create lenses for the RF mount. And those manufacturers are Sigma and Tamron. We are going to see one zoom lens, a 10 to 20 millimeter zoom lens, which is being developed for the RF mount coming soon, along with 6 lenses from Sigma. Now, the most interesting thing about this update is all of these lenses are APS-C only. Now, this is different to what we've seen Nikon doing, for example, who did seem to have something similar going on, but that was worked out about 2 years ago. And Tamron has been able to provide full-frame lenses for the Nikon Z mount. Sigma has only been able to provide APS-C lenses also for the Z mount, but the CEO of Sigma indicated just a few months ago it sounded like full-frame Nikon Z lenses were coming soon. That was roughly hinted towards, not exactly said, but I do think I get the feeling we're going to get some Sigma full frame Z lenses this year. Let's quickly go through the Canon APS-C lenses from Sigma that will be coming this year. Firstly, we have the Sigma 18 to 50 2.8 coming in July. Then there's the Sigma 10 to 18, 16mm 1.4, 23mm 1.4, 30mm 1.4, and the 56mm 1.4. All of these are contemporary lenses. Those last 5 lenses are coming in Q4 of 2024. This is being telegraphed a pretty long way in advance, as much as 6 months or so in advance. I presume it's Q4 as in calendar year, which means that starts in October, and we are now in April. So that's a minimum of 4 months away. Now, Sigma are stating that the control algorithms are being specifically created for the RF mount, and that includes autofocus. So yes, these lenses are absolutely being created under license with Canon's full approval and blessing. So this is a super exciting news for Canon users. And like when Sigma first created Z lenses for the Nikon Z mount, yes, it's a little bit frustrating for full frame users that they are only APS-C, but as I said before, I do think we'll have full-frame lenses coming for Z from Sigma. My guess is this year. I do think Canon will follow suit at some point in time. I don't think it'll be this year based on this current rough roadmap. And just before we jump out of that one, a little tiny bit of analysis. Canon has clearly stated that they are doing this for financial reasons. So they'll probably keep a pretty close eye on exactly which lenses they will allow to be created. What we've seen from all of the 3 major manufacturers that do APS-C and full-frame sensor cameras is that they don't create as many APS-C lenses. And so what that's allowing for is for the third parties to come in and create those APS-C lenses. Sony and Nikon, there is an enormous array of third-party lenses which seem to just be coming faster and faster all the time. Like the Chinese manufacturers are absolutely blowing it out of the water. And this lens here, for example, which was just released, and this is the Viltrox 40mm 2.5. It's a great little lens, super affordable, just been released, and There's just so many options like this coming. Now, of course, you can use this on APS-C cameras as well. Things are going nuts for Sony and Nikon at this point in time when it comes to third-party glass. And now with this announcement from Canon, I think this is a magnificent step, and we will see a slow increase of momentum, which is pretty much what we saw with Nikon probably heading towards somewhere between 3 and 4 years ago when the first of the Viltrox AF lenses came out, because these are all AF lenses. People have been making manual lenses, but that's a different story. They're not made under license a lot of the time. Now, the momentum is beginning with Canon, and well, we can see 3 or 4 years later how that momentum has played out with Nikon. Just an enormous number. I have actually received 4 lenses to review just in the last week for Z-mount. So yeah, a lot going on in that space. I don't want to do a deep dive about this news in this particular episode, other than to say that Ricoh has announced that they are creating a new Pentax film camera. I think this is really bold, really exciting, and this is what we've seen Pentax do. They haven't chased mirrorless, and now they're actually going to create a new film camera. So I really look forward to talking about that more in the future. And do let me know in the comments below, is film of interest to you? Let's put up a poll, actually. I'd really love to know what percentage of people would... One thing is to have a sort of nostalgic feelings and thoughts that you might go back and use film today. Another one is, would you actually do it? A couple of years ago, I got hold of a couple of rolls of film and had planned to shoot some film. But for me, I shot and processed and developed so much film from about 1985 through till the very early 2000s. So 15, 16, 17 year period. And I have absolutely zero desire, personally, to work with the film again. Let's put up a poll. Would you, for real, not just nostalgic thoughts, but would you for real use film again? Yes or no? Please vote. I would love to know your thoughts about that. But I am very excited to see what this camera brings, because what does all of the modern technology we have today, how does that apply to a film camera? And I don't know, I haven't thought about it at all. I'd love to know your thoughts about that as well in the comments below. I just think it's super interesting. Where are they going to take it? My first camera was the Pentax K1000. So I have a close attachment to Pentax. It's actually just over there on the shelf behind me. I have a close connection with Pentax, the K1000. Some of my most important early images were created with Pentax, probably up until about 1996, 97 when I bought my Nikon F5. Yeah, so Pentax is a big part of my early career. 7 Artisans have just released a 50mm 1.4 tilt shift lens. This new tilt shift lens, it's an APS-C lens, so it's compatible with Sony E and Fuji APS-C mounts, along with Panasonic and Olympus Micro Four Thirds. Love to see it for some of the other mounts. I might be getting hold of some of the other mounts because I think there's some interesting things going on, for example, in the Panasonic space. Cameras like the S5 II and the S5 IIX, with their recent firmware updates, are really powerful, interesting, and affordable cameras, and I think they're worth exploring. Nikon does keep punching out firmware updates. We've had an extremely minor one for the Z8 firmware 2.01. We've had an update for the D850, which is amazing because that camera is from 2017. So we're talking 7 years ago launched. That's a lot of support, along with the D7500. Now, the Z8 is just minor bug fixes. They include this Wi-Fi firmware updates that we've been seeing across Nikon's entire line of cameras that they're still supporting. Changed the default values with the following settings displayed when connecting wirelessly, the encryption keys, and the password displayed after the camera's default settings are restored, along with fixed the following issues. Green color cast occurred with some pictures taken. The date and time set in camera sometimes would not be correctly applied. using picture review to view an image in a tall portrait orientation and zooming the image preview prevented the display from being scrolled to the intended direction with multi-selector or sub-selector. After a firmware update, the eye sensor sometimes would not function and the viewfinder would not turn on. The eye menu would sometimes remain in the viewfinder when it was look-through after the shutter release button was pressed halfway to exit the eye menu, viewed in the monitor. These are absolutely minor bug fixes, nothing that would actually stop you from doing anything at all. It's great to see that Nikon is continuing this support, and this is a pretty fast turnaround from version 2.00. With the Nikon D850 firmware update version 1.31, change the default password displayed on the connection menu after all the camera's settings were reset. And on the D7500 version 1.12, change the default password displayed on the connection menu after the camera's settings were reset, and fixed a phenomenon in which the L and R sound level indicators on both the camera monitor and external HDMI recorders are reversed while images are output to the HDMI recorder in Movie Live View. What an amazing thing. This camera's been out quite a few years. This is an extraordinarily minor bug, but they have chosen to fix it along with the Wi-Fi password stuff. I think it's very good form. As I talked about in the opener, there is firmware 2.01 for the Sony A1. And that was an update, a bug fix for the 2.00, which had introduced bugs. And it would seem, looking on some forums and Sony Alpha rumors, there are still some users that are finding that there is an error that appears saying that their Wi-Fi/Bluetooth has an error, is not functioning correctly. Now, some people are suggesting that this is Sony trying to inform users that they have faulty hardware. And this is deliberate, as opposed to the firmware has introduced this issue with the hardware. Now, I think that's an amazing piece of mental gymnastics to say that Sony has written the firmware to tell users that they now have a problem with their hardware that they didn't have before. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that Sony users are continuing to have ongoing issues with this long-awaited original firmware 2.0 for the A1. The A1 is now over 3 years old, introduced at the start of 2021. And, well, I hope that there's a bug fix for this bug fix, and that's if Sony acknowledges it, because as of recording this, Sony are not acknowledging yet, but it's very early hours into this, that 2.01 is still introducing issues for some users. Sony Alpha Rumors is stating that there will be 2 new cameras to come this year, E-mount cameras. There will be no A1 Mark II. Now, that's fine from my perspective. I would love to see Sony getting into the 4-year cycle rather than the cycle that we've seen with, say, the A7R and the A7, where they have run at like a 2 and a bit year cycle since introduced in 2013. Having cameras coming every 2 years, I'm not sure it's good for customers, consumers. It just creates too much confusion, and you get this kind of, your camera becomes less valuable faster, and there's just too many products coming out and features arrive and then you can't have them. And it feels like you're forcing your users to upgrade too often. And it's just not necessary. Often with these sort of cameras, not only is a 4-year cycle fine, but certainly in the DSLR days, you could probably miss and do the tick-tock and just do every tick-tick as opposed to tick-tock, tick-tock. You just do the tick-tick. And so you might only upgrade your camera every 8 years or even longer. So I think it's fantastic that hopefully with Sony's flagship, the A1, they're moving to a 4-year cycle, which I think that's just good for the industry. I think it's good for customers, and I actually think it's good for Sony. So we can just get into a more sort of regular rhythm that everybody can get used to. But beyond that, and I'd love to have a discussion about this in another video in the future, but we could also have a discussion about it in the comments. What are the most major innovations that the current era, the mirrorless era, has brought to us? I don't think we'll be iterating with major hardware advancements like IBIS, like frame rates, like global, and like AIAF, which we've seen all of those things except for global happened in the first, let's say, 5 or 6 years, and then, well, global took a long time. Will we have that same level? I feel like a 4-year cycle, it's good, because then each camera can actually have a much more major hardware improvement, and it makes more sense. Like, then it's like, yeah, well, maybe I should update because it's quite different. Like, I think there's a good chance if the A1 II comes sometime next year, yeah, it might be global, just like we've talked about in the past that, say, a Z9 II, which it's hard to believe, but that will be 4 years at the end of next year. Could that be global? Is that enough time for a 45, let's say, or 50 megapixel sensor? Really interesting stuff. I think in both cases for Sony and for Nikon, this might be possible. And thus I'm really happy that the A1 II is rumoured not to be here this year, but probably next year. All right, everybody. Well, there's some of the highlights. There has been some other news around the web, but there's just so much to talk about. Another article that I found quite interesting, which I might make a dedicated video about, is that DP Review interviewed every camera company, or most camera companies, to find out what they thought was the most important release they had made in the last 25 years. I won't go through it, but I think it's interesting. It's worth you taking a look at. I'll put a link below. But otherwise, I think I will have a chat about it. And I'm contemplating a live stream about this topic because I think it's a fun, interesting, and nostalgic topic, along with the fact that we could talk about what is the future products that each camera company might well be excited about in the future. All right, so don't forget the poll, which is voting on film, yes or no. Would you actually seriously go back and shoot some film? And of course, as always, I would love to know your thoughts about everything else in between in the comments below. Canon users, are we excited about getting some third-party glass? I have to say there's just so much third-party glass for Z mount, E mount, and Fuji mount, and so on. There's just so much glass out there. This has got to be something that RF users are excited about. All right, well, it's been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I'd love to see you again, so please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.